Ryan Ham here, and what you see before you is an R for Remington. This is the original Remington R51 box, but don't need that anymore. We've got the new Remington R51 box with a new Remington R51. This is the Gen 2 model. I'll go through some of this stuff that I skipped here. It's the owner's manual. If you'll notice that they did revise it, it is revision 1215. Lock, junk, and magazines. There's actually 4 magazines. If you saw my other video, you'll see that. And here is a Remington R51. Now let's move the box and we'll look at the gun itself. And the gun shop I got it from is the same one that sent it in the first place. That is Ed's Guns, and they are in Vass, North Carolina. And you can hear that it's got a few more hitches than a standard gun. Empty magazine. Now listen carefully and you can hear how smooth the action is compared to my old video. Now this isn't going to be as smooth as your Glock or your Smith & Wesson or pretty much any other Browning style locking action, because there are more things going on the inside, and I'll explain that to you later when I get the gun taken apart. But essentially the bolt for the gun is not a part of the slide. There's a bolt sitting in here, and that has got to be lifted and pulled back, pushed forward, and then drop down into its locking recess. What you see that says 9mm Luger Plus P is not the bolt. The bolt is down inside. You can see it kind of dropping away as I pull the slide back there. So when you hear different hitches that are different than you're used to out of your Browning, don't get too concerned. I'm over-exaggerating them. In reality, you're going to be charging that and it's not going to be any big deal. But when you feel it's got hitches and hesitations at different points, but it goes back and forth just like any other pistol out there. One thing I wanted you to notice is this. Hear that sound? This is aluminum. This is plastic. Now, why do you skeletonize a plastic trigger? That is beyond me, and it is also beyond reason why they would have made it skeletonized. I don't mind plastic triggers so much, but why do you skeletonize it? The trigger itself, I'll try and hold this as steady as possible. The trigger itself has some side-to-side play. I will try and hold it as still as possible. In fact, when I say some, it has got a significant amount of side-to-side play. I do not know why they didn't re-engineer that. I kind of wish they had. That was one complaint a lot of people had. Another complaint, I've already cleared the gun. You can see that it's empty for yourself. One complaint that I heard a lot of was the trigger. Now, I will tell you, pulling this trigger, it feels kind of nice. I kind of like that. But hold down on the trigger, cycle the action, and let's watch the reset. Listen for it too. Did you hear anything? No, neither did I. But it reset. Watch this again. It is an absolutely silent, and just I can't understand. There's zero reset, tactile sound, anything like that. You cannot tell when the trigger is resetting, so your only recourse is to let the trigger all the way out. I cannot tell at all where that trigger is resetting. It's a single action pistol that is inexcusable. Okay, what it's doing there is it's hanging up on the hammer. 95% sure that it is hanging up on the hammer. And then when you pull it a little bit farther, see, it'll hang up there. When you pull it a little bit farther, it finishes cocking the hammer. Yeah, I cannot get it to hang up again, so when it's going back and it's cocking the hammer, there is a point at which it stops, and you can stop it. The AK-47 is the same way. The hammer on the AK-47 will stop the slide from going forward if you don't charge it all the way. So that's nothing unusual in the gun world. It's just something I noticed when I was trying to show you where you can pull the trigger. So let's pull the slide back ever so slightly, and I can pull the trigger there. See how far back the slide is? Okay. Let's pull the slide back even farther, and I cannot pull the trigger there. It's trying to pull the trigger there, and that I can pull the trigger on that one. My belief is that the gun is essentially in battery at that point. Completely different. There's the hammer catching the slide again. Completely different than the original model that I had. So I can pull the trigger there, can pull the trigger there, and I cannot pull the trigger there. Cannot pull the trigger there, although it's starting to grab. There, I can pull the trigger there. So I know that was up close, so it was hard to tell, but I'm going to call that a pass. And the reason I'm going to call it a pass is because I know the original model, the quote-unquote tolerance stacking, was significant on that one, and it was I could pull the trigger when the gun was much farther and completely out of battery, and you saw that in my video if you watched my video. For comparison, a Glock Model 26, I'm sorry, that's a Glock Model 30. Okay, so that's in battery, that's out of battery. I could still pull the trigger when it's much farther out of battery. Can't pull the trigger. Pull the trigger. Can't. So a little bit farther out of battery, I say much farther, a little bit farther out of battery for the Glock Model 30. Your Glock should fire farther out of battery than the Remington Model R51. Let's take the gun apart. So first we'll start off with the slide. As you can see from the inside look, that it is fairly well machined, especially compared to the last one that we had here. There's a hole here, and I'm not sure if that was there before. That hole there is a loaded chamber indicator, or a loaded chamber window, and you can see there's also a hole in the top of the bolt face, or on top of the bolt there, and those two line up when they're inside the gun, so you can look, and in theory you could see brass down in there, but that's a good ways in to look. I think that's kind of a cheesy thing. So some of the differences I'll note, there is a set screw on the front sight. There's also one on the rear sight. Don't know if the one on the rear sight was there before, but there was no set screw on the front sight, and I think that's to address people who had problems with the sight coming loose. In my opinion, that is not a good fix. I didn't think it was a good fix when they first said they were going to do it, when the updates for the R51 were announced. That was about a year ago, and I didn't like it because the way you're supposed to do it is you're supposed to fix the tolerances. You're not supposed to put a band-aid on it and call it good. So the forward slanting sight, as you can see, has a bit of a backward cant at the top, which kind of negates a lot of the positives of being able to hook that onto your gear and use it to pull the slide back. Why would they make it to where you could do that and then round the top over? Do you see what I'm talking about right here? They've rounded the top over. But overall, I still like the design of the forward canted sights. It makes drawing the pistol easier because there's less resistance to drawing it until you get to the front sight. or the sharp corner there. So looking down inside, I have cleaned it up. It looked like it had been shot, not any of that white lithium grease on the inside, but it was well lubed and with a good amount of fouling on there, like they'd shot it, cleaned it, and shot it some more. So who knows how many times this gun has been fired? None by me, but prior at the factory, hopefully they tested it well enough. One thing you can tell here is just from the factory, now I have cycled the action a few times, but just from the factory you could see that there are little wear marks there and there, and those are kind of pronounced. And I can actually hang the edge of the screwdriver on that, so it is actually peening down into the channel a little bit. We'll have to watch that and make sure it doesn't progress any. The front lug there do not appear to have any wear on them. Here's the channel where the firing pin would go through, and just for illustration purposes, that's what the bolt looks like down inside of there. I don't know how this compares to the last one. There's a little channel here for the ejector. The ejector would go through there. Pull it back in again. The ejector goes through there and all the way up through here, and then knocks the cases out up here. And I'll show you the ejector in a minute. The bolt looks, move on to the bolt. The bolt looks fairly well finished. One thing I'm not too keen on is if you look down here, that little Remington green part there, it looks like it's a polymer spring. Like there's no actual spring in there. There's just a chunk of polymer that actuates the extractor. And I'm not sure if that's the case or not. There might be a spring, that might just be a spring keeper. The extractor's kept on with this little pin here. There's two little divots on the top of the bolt here. There's the firing pin. It does not appear that anywhere in this design is incorporated a drop safety. There's the firing pin retaining pin. There's a fat side and a skinny side. It looks like I could probably just drive that through there, but I'm not going to take it out. Yeah, should be able to just drive that through. So one thing you'll notice on here, as with the original model 51, is this cross section here, where they've got the pin for the firing pin retaining pin. They've got the hole there. That cross section is taking the entire force of the cartridge as it's going back, and it is locking against a shoulder that's right here. So that shoulder locks into the back of the receiver right there. So that little ledge, which is still aluminum, it's already starting to wear. And this gun is brand new to me, but who knows how long they had it at the factory. And they might have justified that factory use as testing it to make sure everything was going to work, but not too happy about getting a gun that's already worn. It appears to be wearing right here where the back of the slide, I'm guessing it's when they're putting the slide on that they're just marking that area up. So that's actually not an area of concern. So as they're putting the slide on, it's just kind of rubbed a little bit off there. So it looks like it's chamfered that way and that way to facilitate putting the back of the slide on, but that is a very sharp edge there. So that's what's happening. I don't recall this on the last one. That is the ejector. I don't recall the ejector moving like that. What that does mean is as you're putting the gun together, just like on the old Smith & Wessons, there's a potential for disaster if you try to just rack that on there. Got to make sure that ejector is down. Okay, so the grip safety is just as bad as the last one. It shouldn't require that much force to engage or disengage, as the case may be. It's sharp in there, sharp in there. Yeah, And I don't want to have to pull out a glove while the bad guy's coming at me. You know what I mean? Okay, so let's see. There is no magazine disconnect because I was able to pull the trigger with the magazine out. See the hammer? Don't know how well you could see down inside of there, but just giving you an overview of the gun. There's this little lever here. It must be a disconnector. Onto the barrel. So as you might recall, the barrel was a point of contention. The chamber, the throat, the ramp. Here's the lugs. These slots hold it onto the frame, up and down. And then this little slot here is where the takedown pin in slide release goes. Some markings. A little peening here. There's the a lot of people look at this and say, well, the barrel's threaded. Awesome, I can just put a suppressor on it. That's not threading. That is to give you it's grooved to give you grip as you're pulling the barrel off the gun. If you watch a disassembly video, I'm not going to disassemble this on camera because it's still kind of cumbersome. I did clean this barrel, so what you are seeing is a cleaned barrel from the factory. It did come with some fouling. You could see some stuff in there, but overall doesn't appear to be too bad. Alright, spring, just standard spring. Little yeah, nothing new about the spring. This appears to be chrome plated. I don't know if it is or isn't, but if you look at the finish, if you watch my video on chrome versus stainless steel, this appears to be a different shade. My guess is that they put an electroless nickel plating on this. Just from the feel of it, it feels smoother. However, I'm really concerned that they didn't do it 100% right. There is right here. There's an area where I can catch. I was catching my thumbnail on it earlier. And just appears to have a little bit of wear on it, like it was worn that way before I got a hold of it. So, for those of you who don't know the R51 action, get this down inside the slot. When the gun is locked up, the case will be in the chamber right under where my finger is. And if you look all the way back here, you see this little gap here. That little gap there. That is very necessary because when the gun fires, it pushes the bolt back like so. And that little bit that it's pushing it back is pushing against the, see how the gap is gone? It's pushing against the slide during that little period. During that little push, remember it's a fixed barrel, during that little push it is giving enough inertia to the slide to operate the gun through the entire cycle. So it is blowback actuated, but it is locked breech, because at that point the bolt cannot go any farther back. It is prevented on the top from going any farther back by these lugs in here. These lugs press on the top of the bolt and force it down and keep it down there, so it physically cannot move up. It's not sliding up this. This isn't a ramp. This isn't an incline. It's not sliding up there slowly like it would on a lever delayed blowback, for instance, like my Benelli B76 that I've got another video on. Feel free to check it out, like and subscribe. But back to reality here. that little bit, it is moving under blowback power, so the chamber must be smooth because it's at a high pressure like a 9mm or fluted. And I know this chamber is not fluted because we've already looked. So during that little bit of travel, pushes the bolt or pushes the slide, and the slide will go all the way back and actuate the entire cycle. As it's going back, these little cams here, that cam there and that cam there, engage the bolt here and on the other side, and they lift that bolt up slightly, and that's enough of a lift to get it to pass by that shoulder. When it comes down, it pushes the bolt back down into its recess and locks it, and it pushes it right there. Okay, so that's the cycle. I think we've looked at all the parts except for the slide release. I do not believe the slide release has changed any. Slide stop, whatever you want to call it. I don't believe that's changed any. I do like the way it's nice and contoured here and here, so it feels smooth along the side of the gun. I also like the way it is held into a recess here. There's a nice little recessed area here, so it fits down, sunk down into the frame. That limits its upward and downward travel, and it makes the frame not quite as wide as it could be. For instance, on a gun that doesn't have that, this is the PM9 that I showed you. On a gun that doesn't have that, the slide release sticks a good bit out of the side of the gun, and it'll actually dig into you on a, if you're carrying it against your body, that little chunk will dig into you all day long. There's still that little sharp edge at the front of the magazine well. The magazine floor plate is fatter and a little bit thicker, and we'll compare it to the original model. So you notice the original R51 magazine is on the left, and the new improved one is on the right. Right off the bat, you will notice this ridge here, I guess, to aid in feeding. But the magazine bodies do not appear different by much, if they're different at all. Feed lip geometry looks identical. At the bottom of the magazine there is still, now, okay, this is the new magazine, there is still a little gap where they didn't take the weld as far down as they needed to. Not very happy about that. But looking at the two magazine bases side by side, it is clear that they took cues from me and other reviewers who looked at it and said that is not quite thick enough, so they made it thicker. The retention plate on the inside appears the same. The Remington R is deeper recessed in there and smaller. They say you could still use your original magazines, and I plan on doing that for range use. But I'm going to have to try and get a couple of new magazine floor plates. You see, my problem with the original was that I could just, I'm not putting any force on that at all, and I can move that all over the place. So let's test it. I can move it a little bit, but I have to put a lot of force on it, and I'm not going to put a ton of force on there. Slide right in. They do stick out just a little bit. They make the edge there not quite as sharp, but I think had they rounded that edge over, I would be a lot happier. Well, it feels wrong, so let me get it back together and we'll go on with the review. And now that I've got all these guns laid out, let's take a look at the size of these various pistols. Now, these all have the flush fit magazines. There's nothing added or fancy about them, with the exception of my PF9 here, that I've got these fancy little Talon grips. So the R51, Glock Model 26, we'll line the barrels up, and you can see identical in length. Actually, the Glock 26 maybe a hair longer. So we've got the tops lined up. You can see the Glock 26 is slightly shorter, but about the length of a magazine extension if you had one on the Glock 26. One thing you'll notice is the bore access. It's very clear here, just looking at the guns side by side, that the bore access is significantly higher on the Glock than it is on the R51, and that's going to be a theme here. So we can go through the rest of these pistols. This is the Car PM9. I'm going to put it on the other side because the slide release on that kind of gets in the way. So the PM9, about the same width, however also shorter by about a round, and that, I think that shows in the capacity too. Let's get the back lined up, and here is where it's hard to line up, and here is where the Car PM9 shines. That is a full-on inch, and that is 1 inch and 77 thousandths. So it's a full-on inch shorter, but looking at it from the front, the car likes to tout how wonderfully low their bore access is, but you can tell trigger to trigger the bore access on the R51 is significantly lower. Wow. I knew that going into it. It's just that the car previously has the lowest bore access of any pistol I own, and we'll look at my beloved model PF9 here. You see the PF9 is significantly narrower, slightly shorter, and the length on it is also shorter, but not by as much as the car. But where it counts, if you look at the bore access on the R51 is significantly, let's get the bores lined up, significantly lower. Means the gun sits lower in the hand. Okay, let's get these all on a scale. The R51 weighs in at 22.3 ounces with an empty magazine, which is 630 grams. The Glock 26 weighs in at 22 ounces even with an empty magazine, which is 625 grams. The PM9 weighs in at 16.7 ounces with an empty magazine, which is 475 grams. And the Kel-Tec PF9 weighs in at 15 ounces even with an empty magazine, but this one has the Talon grips on it and the aluminum trigger, so those might add a slight amount of weight. And that translates to 430 grams for you Imperial challenged people. And take it with a gram of salt that the R51 has an aluminum frame. All of these other pistols have plastic grips, although they all have either steel or aluminum inserts or subframes. And in case you wondered, the new magazine weighs in at exactly 2 ounces unloaded, otherwise known as 55 grams in France. And as promised, Remington did deliver, and they gave me a Pelican case with my new Remington R51. Very strong case. It's got these little press locks. You just press in on it and lift up and spin it around here. And inside, you see it is cut for the R51, so it fits just fine in there. A little bit of play, but not too much. One thing you'll also note on this is that it's got these little cutout inserts for a larger pistol. I don't know, maybe a 1911 R1 or something like that. Also, if you have a laser, there's room in there for it. And room for 2 magazines, so you could have 1 magazine in the pistol. And since you have 4 magazines at least, if you've gotten one of these from Remington, you'd have 2 magazines here, and oh, I guess these dividers do come out, so you can fit lots of stuff in there if you want. This is Ryan Ham. I'll see you at the range.